The wind on the plains cut like a blade, carrying with it the raw scent of winter and loneliness. Malachi Brooks pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he crossed the stretch of frozen earth leading back to his barn. Night had come early, smothering what little warmth the sun had offered, and the cattle inside were restless, their breaths steaming like ghosts in the dark. Life on the frontier rarely offered kindness, but tonight the cold seemed to bite deeper, carrying an unease he could not quite name. As he latched the barn door, a shape stumbled out of the blackness beyond the fence line. For a heartbeat, Malachi thought it was one of his steers broken loose, but the figure moved with a human stagger, collapsing once, then dragging itself back up as though every step was a battle. Malachi's hand instinctively brushed the grip of his revolver, but as the stranger drew closer, the sight was not one of threat but of desperation. The man was little more than a shadow wrapped in rags. His clothes were torn, his boots half rotted, his hands trembling as he tried to pull the tatters of a blanket tighter around his frame. Frost clung to his eyelashes, and his lips were split from the wind. Malachi had seen men die of cold before, their bodies curled like children when the prairie claimed them. This man wasn't far from that fate. Malachi's first instinct was caution. Strangers meant trouble out here, especially ones who arrived at night, too weak to explain themselves. But then the man's knees buckled, and he fell face first into the dirt. Malachi swore under his breath. Shrugging off his heavy sheepskin coat and kneeling beside him, he rolled the stranger onto his back, and the man's eyes fluttered open, wide and fevered, reflecting a fear deeper than the cold. "You'll freeze solid if you stay out here another minute," Malachi muttered, wrapping the coat around the man's shoulders. The stranger shivered violently, his jaw working as though words were trapped behind his teeth, but only a rasp of breath escaped. His skin burned with fever even in the icy air. Whoever he was, he had been running from something longer than any man ought to. Malachi dragged the man to his feet, half carrying him across the yard toward the house. Mrs. Crane, who kept his home in order and spoke her mind sharper than most men's knives, gasped when she saw the bundle of rags and bones slumped against him. Without a word, she stoked the fire higher and fetched a blanket. They laid the stranger by the hearth, his breath ragged, his body trembling as though shaking loose the memory of whatever had chased him into the night. Malachi watched the man's face in the firelight. There was something about him, a sharpness in the cheekbones, a weariness etched too deep for mere poverty. He wasn't a drifter in the usual sense. No, this man had the look of someone marked, hunted. Yet, despite himself, Malachi felt a tug of pity. Out here, survival often came down to the mercy of strangers, and tonight, the man had found his. When the stranger finally stirred enough to drink, his voice was hoarse, broken by thirst. "You shouldn't have helped me." His eyes, dark and piercing, even in exhaustion, locked onto Malachi's with a warning more than gratitude. "It'll bring you nothing but trouble." Malachi frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Trouble don't scare me much. What scares me is leaving a man to die in the dirt." The stranger closed his eyes, shaking his head as if to argue, but no strength remained in him. Soon, the rhythm of shallow, uneasy sleep took him. Mrs. Crane muttered disapprovingly about taking in vagabonds, but she covered the man with another quilt all the same. Malachi said nothing. He couldn't explain the instinct that had made him give away his coat. Perhaps it was just the memory of his father's words. Out here, a man's worth ain't measured by his cattle, but by whether another soul lives to see the morning because of him. That night, Malachi lay awake in his own bed, listening to the wind scrape against the shutters and the stranger's ragged breathing echo faintly through the walls. Something gnawed at him, an unease that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He had saved a man's life, but at what cost? By morning, the question had teeth. Malachi rose at dawn to find the yard filled with a silence heavier than snow. The cattle were restless again, huddled at the far end of the pen. The horses stamped nervously in their stalls, ears flicking toward the ridgeline. Malachi followed their gaze, and his heart slowed to a crawl. Across the frostbitten horizon, riders appeared one after another, cresting the ridge like a wave of shadows against the pale morning sky. Not three, not a dozen, but an army. Their paint-striped ponies carried warriors draped in feathers and hides, their faces cold and unreadable. The earth seemed to shiver beneath the weight of their numbers. By the time the last rider appeared, the yard was surrounded on all sides. 150 men. Malachi's barn stood at the center like a trapped animal, and he knew at once this was no chance meeting. They had come for something or someone, and the only new thing on his ranch was the man still sleeping by his fire. Mrs. Crane appeared at his shoulder, pale but steady, her hands gripping her apron. "What have you done, Malachi?" she whispered. Malachi's jaw tightened as he watched the riders fan out, their leader raising a hand in silent command. The morning sun caught the edge of his lance, and for a moment it gleamed like a blade of fire. Malachi swallowed hard. The barn loomed behind Malachi like a fortress too fragile to withstand what surrounded it. The riders sat silent, their ponies shifting restlessly, steam rising from their nostrils in the bitter morning air. Not a single word had been spoken, yet the message was clear. They were not here by accident. Their eyes were fixed not on the land, not on the cattle, but on the house itself, on what lay inside. The stranger. Malachi's hand brushed the butt of his revolver. A useless gesture, really. What good was 6 bullets against 150 men who had lived their lives by the bow and the rifle? Still, instinct made his fingers curl around the grip. If violence came, he would not die without a fight. The leader urged his horse forward. He was a tall man, shoulders broad beneath a cloak of buffalo hide, his hair bound with strips of red cloth that fluttered in the wind. Painted lines streaked across his face, black and white like the wings of a raven. His eyes were sharp, not with hatred, but with the weight of purpose. He raised a hand, palm outward, and the mass of warriors stilled behind him, as if one breath bound them together. "You?" the leader called, his voice carrying easily across the frozen yard. "The man who owns this land. Bring him forth." Malachi stepped down off the porch, his boots crunching on the frost. He tried to keep his voice steady, though his heart hammered like a drum in his chest. "I'm Malachi Brooks. This is my ranch. You're standing on it. State your business." The leader studied him for a long moment, then tilted his head slightly. "Last night, a man came here. Weak. Hunted. We tracked his trail through the snow, and it ended at your door." His gaze was piercing, his tone flat. "Where is he?" Malachi glanced toward the house, where the fire inside cast faint shadows against the window. The stranger was still sleeping by that fire, oblivious to the storm gathering around him. Malachi could almost feel the weight of Mrs. Crane's stare boring into the back of his neck, begging him to tell the truth or perhaps to lie. He cleared his throat. "A man came, half dead from the cold. I gave him shelter. He's inside. But before you lay a hand on him, I want to know why you ride 150 strong to my barn over a single freezing soul." A murmur rippled through the riders. The leader's expression did not change. He dismounted with deliberate calm, boots striking the frozen ground. When he stood before Malachi, he seemed taller still, as though the land itself lent him stature. "That man," he said quietly, "is no stranger to us. He carries blood debt on his hands. He fled justice, and our people demand he face it. By giving him your coat, by giving him shelter, you have tied your name to his fate. Whether you knew it or not, Brooks, you chose a side." Malachi's stomach twisted. He thought of the fevered warning the stranger had whispered, "You shouldn't have helped me. It'll bring you nothing but trouble." How right the man had been. "And what exactly is his crime?" Malachi asked. The leader's eyes darkened. "He betrayed our people. He made promises of peace, then sold our land piece by piece to men who cut down the earth and left nothing but stumps and ash. Families starved because of him. Blood was spilled because of him. He thought he could vanish into the white man's towns, hide behind walls and strangers' kindness. But there is no place he can go that our memory will not follow." Malachi's jaw clenched. This was no ordinary fugitive, then. The man in his home had not simply wandered here by chance. He carried a history that stretched far beyond the horizon, and now Malachi was tangled in it. "I'll fetch him," Malachi said slowly. The leader gave a single nod. Do so, and quickly. The patience of my men grows thin." Malachi turned on his heel and walked back toward the porch. His boots felt heavier with each step. Mrs. Crane stood waiting in the doorway, her hands wringing the edge of her apron, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't hand him over," she hissed in a sharp whisper. "Not without knowing the truth. You'll be sending him to his death." "And if I don't," Malachi said grimly, "they'll burn this place to the ground. Us with it." Mrs. Crane's face twisted with anguish, but she stepped aside. Inside, the stranger was awake now, propped up on one elbow, his eyes burning with a fever that seemed to cut deeper than sickness. He had heard every word. "They've come for me," he rasped. Malachi crossed the room, standing over him. "Seems like it. They say you betrayed them, that you starved families, sold land." The man shook his head weakly. "Lies. Twisted half-truths. I was an envoy and negotiator between their people and the rail companies. I signed papers, yes, but not the kind they claim. I tried to stop the worst of it. I tried to keep them from losing everything, and for that, I made enemies on both sides. They call it betrayal because it's easier than admitting the truth. Their own leaders made bargains behind closed doors, bargains they now regret." Malachi studied him in silence. He wanted to believe the man. The desperation in his eyes didn't look like guilt. It looked like someone caught in a storm too vast to fight. But could he risk staking his life, his home, his land on the word of a stranger he had known less than a day? The man's hand shot out, gripping Malachi's wrist with surprising strength. "Please," he whispered. "If you hand me over, I'm dead before nightfall. They don't want justice. They want a scapegoat." His eyes bored into Malachi's, fever bright. "You gave me your coat. That makes you part of this whether you want to be or not. Don't let that act of mercy become the rope they hang me with." Malachi pulled free, pacing the length of the room. His father's voice haunted him again. "A man's worth ain't measured by his cattle, but by whether another soul lives to see the morning because of him." Outside, the warriors shifted restlessly, their ponies snorting, their voices low and impatient. Time was running thin. Malachi finally stopped pacing. His decision sat heavy on his tongue. "What's your name?" he asked. The stranger hesitated, as though the word itself was dangerous. "Jonas," he said at last. "Jonas Hale." Malachi nodded slowly. Then he turned, pushing the door open once more. The cold wind slapped his face as he stepped onto the porch. The leader still stood there, waiting, his patience wearing thin. "Well?" the man asked. Malachi's voice was steady, though his insides trembled. "He's sick. Too weak to stand, let alone ride. You want him, you'll have to come in and drag him out. But hear me now. This is my land, my home, and no man, not the bank, not the law, and not you, comes through that door without stepping over me first." A ripple of surprise moved through the gathered warriors. The leader's expression hardened, unreadable. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the low moan of the wind. Then, slowly, the leader smiled. Not with warmth, but with something sharper. "So be it, Brooks. If you would tie your fate to his, then your fate will be the same. We wait until the sun is high. If he is not surrendered by then, we take him, and everything else with him." He turned, mounting his horse in a single fluid motion. With a signal of his hand, the great circle of warriors shifted, settling like wolves around a trapped prey. The message was clear. Malachi's ranch was a prison now. There would be no escape. As the leader rode back to join his men, Malachi's chest tightened with dread. He had chosen. Whether out of mercy, pride, or sheer stubbornness, he had chosen. And as the sun crept higher in the winter sky, he knew the price of that choice would soon be paid in blood. The hours that followed stretched like years. The warriors sat their horses in silence, circling the ranch like shadows carved from stone. No laughter, no idle talk, only the low murmur of men waiting for blood. The sound of their ponies' hooves shifting in the frost became the drumbeat of Malachi's own racing pulse. Inside, the fire popped and cracked, but its warmth felt fragile against the cold tide pressing in from all sides. Jonas Hale sat upright now, propped against the wall near the hearth, his face pale but his eyes sharp. Fever still clung to him, but his voice had steadied. "They won't wait long," he said. "The leader out there, his name's Crow Feather. I've seen him before. He's no fool. When the sun reaches its peak, he'll strike, and there'll be no reasoning left." Malachi leaned against the table, arms crossed, staring into the flames. "Then tell me straight, did you do it? Did you betray them?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "I never betrayed them. I tried to stop what was coming, but the companies had more gold than I had words. I signed papers. Yes, but papers meant to stall, to give the people more time to prepare, to hold on to what little they had left. It wasn't enough. Too many saw me as the one who brought the deals, so when the land fell, so did my name. I'm the man they can blame, the man they can hunt. But the truth? The truth is buried under deeds and signatures no warrior ever got to see." Mrs. Crane, arms folded tight against her chest, gave him a long, hard look. "So they believe you're the thief, the traitor, and now they've come to take their vengeance." Jonas's eyes flicked to her, then back to Malachi. "I can't change what they believe, but I'll be damned if I let them cut me down without a word in my defense. If you hand me over, you won't be saving yourself. You'll only be proving to them they were right to believe mercy is a lie." Malachi stared at the man, then at the walls of his house, the beams his grandfather had cut, the stones his father had laid, the roof patched by his own hands. The ranch wasn't just his home. It was his family's blood and sweat etched into earth and timber. To lose it would be to lose them all over again. Yet what was a home worth, if the price of keeping it was surrendering another man to die without a voice? Outside, a raven cried, its harsh call splitting the silence. Malachi straightened, decision burning through his hesitation. "Then we don't hand you over," he said. Mrs. Crane's gasp was sharp, but she said nothing. Jonas's eyes widened, disbelief warring with gratitude. "You'll risk it all for me?" Malachi's jaw set like stone. "I gave you my coat. That meant I wasn't about to let you freeze. Well, I'm not about to let you hang either. Not without truth standing between you and the rope." The three of them set to work. Malachi hauled rifles down from the mantel, weapons that hadn't seen use since his father's day. Mrs. Crane fetched powder and shot, her hands steady despite her pale face. Jonas, weak though he was, forced himself to stand, insisting he could hold a gun if it came to it. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the ranch was braced for a siege. Windows shuttered, doors barred, rifles loaded. Malachi stood at the front porch, rifle in hand, watching as Crow Feather rode forward again, his men fanning out behind him. "The time has come," Crow Feather said, his voice carrying like thunder across the still air. "Bring him out, or we come in." Malachi stepped down off the porch, rifle leveled at his side. "You want him? Then you'll have to take us all. But before you do, hear me. You call him a traitor. You call him a thief. Maybe he is. Maybe he ain't. But I won't hand a man over to die on nothing more than the bitterness of memory. If he's guilty, then prove it. Bring your evidence. Bring your witnesses. Bring more than a mob with painted faces and sharpened steel. Because justice, true justice, don't ride in on the back of fear." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Crow Feather's eyes narrowed, but he did not speak at once. He studied Malachi, studied the house behind him, and for the first time, doubt flickered across his painted face. Jonas staggered onto the porch, pale but upright, leaning heavily on the doorframe. His voice cracked but carried. "Crow Feather, you remember me. You remember the councils. You know what I said then, and I'll say it again now. I tried to save your people from the worst of it. I failed, yes, but I was no thief. The gold never touched my hands. The lies came from your own chiefs who bartered away your land behind closed doors. But blame is easier when it wears another man's face, isn't it? That's why you hunt me. Not because I stole from you, but because I'm the ghost you can't silence." A hush fell over the gathered riders. Crowfeather's jaw worked as though he might spit venom in response, but no words came. The silence stretched, taut as wire. Then, with a sharp cry, one of the younger warriors broke rank, spurring his horse forward. "Lies!" he roared, raising his rifle. "He dies now!" Malachi didn't think. He fired. The crack of the rifle shattered the air, and the young warrior's horse screamed, stumbling sideways as the bullet struck the dirt inches from its hooves. The rider cursed, dragging the beast back under control. Gasps rippled through the gathered men, but Malachi stood firm, smoke curling from his barrel. "Nobody dies here today," he shouted. "Not unless you mean to kill me first." The air bristled, on the edge of snapping into chaos. Dozens of hands twitched toward weapons. Horses reared. The barn loomed behind Malachi like tinder waiting for the match. Then Crowfeather raised his hand, slowly, deliberately. The warriors froze. For a long moment, he sat silent, staring at Malachi, at Jonas, at the house that stood between them. Then he gave a sharp nod. "Very well," he said. "You speak of proof. You speak of justice. Then let it be so. The man lives for now. But know this, Brooks, you've tied yourself to him. His fate is your fate. If he's guilty, your blood will be counted with his." With that, Crowfeather wheeled his horse, signaling his men. One by one, the warriors turned, filing back toward the ridgeline. Soon the yard was empty, save for the churned earth and the echo of hooves fading into distance. Malachi lowered his rifle slowly, his hands trembling. Mrs. Crane sagged against the doorway, her breath shaking. Jonas sank to his knees on the porch, exhaustion overtaking him. They had survived for now, but Malachi knew the reprieve was temporary. He had stood against 150 warriors, not with bullets, but with defiance. The storm had only been delayed. The fight for truth, for survival, had only just begun. Mercy is a dangerous thing. Malachi lent his coat to a freezing stranger, never knowing it would place his ranch under siege by 150 warriors. One act of compassion tied his fate to another man's, and from that moment, his life would never be the same. It is a story as old as the frontier itself, of trust, betrayal, and the thin line between justice and vengeance.